It's known as the master gland because it produces so many hormones that exert influences at different locations in the body. It also is working in close concert with the structure of the brain known as the hypothalamus. So everybody should be familiar with the hypothalamus, hopefully have an idea of where that is. Hypothalamus works in a couple of different ways, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I want to start by looking at the pituitary gland and the different areas of the pituitary gland. As you can see, it looks very different depending on what part of the pituitary gland you're looking at. This area here would be what we know as the anterior pituitary gland. There's other names for it. You might see adenohypophysis. You might see pars distalis. You can call it whatever you want. I just call it the anterior pituitary gland, but any of those names is correct. Then we have this posterior portion. This is the posterior pituitary gland. Again, other names for it include neurohypophysis, pars nervosa. Okay, either of those is fine. I just call it the posterior pituitary. You can't see it very well on this slide, but there is a thin intermediate section of the pituitary. I just generally think of that as the intermediate pituitary. You might see the name pars intermedia. I don't know how much your book dwells on the intermediate pituitary. I can't remember. But also notice here that there's a little bit of a stalk. Hopefully you saw this when you were looking at the brain model. The pituitary is kind of held a little bit away from the brain by this stalk that's known as the infundibulum. In fact, a lot of the brains you looked at probably didn't have a pituitary because the infundibulum is just this little wire that sticks out from the brain model, and a lot of the pituitaries have been snapped off that wire. So that's what this is. All right. As we get into this, this is a little different slide, a little better, showing you some of the histology of the pituitary gland. This is the anterior portion, this is the posterior portion, and then this is the intermediate portion. Okay? So just by appearance, each of them should look a little different from the other. And we're going to talk about how they are. Okay, so here's the anterior pituitary gland. There are different cells in here. They make different hormones, and they are named based on their appearance. So we have these cells, which are known as basophils, these cells known as acidophils, and then we have cells called chromophobes. And I'm going to go ahead and advance one more because I think we have a difference. So if we look here, we see that the basophils are cells with the cytoplasm stains this deep bluish or deep purplish color. And we can see those through here. You see the nucleus and the cytoplasm are about the same color, all right? And then if we look at the acidophils, on the other hand, we see that the cytoplasm is stained this reddish coloration, or pinkish, whatever you think that is. But you can definitely see a distinction in the coloration between the cytoplasm there. And then the chromophobes, if you know any of your Greek roots, phobe means fearing, chrome means color. So the cytoplasm in these cells do not take up a staining. It's clear coloration in the chromophobes. Okay. By it is note these follicles. And follicles are kind of like spears of cells. When you cross-section them, you have this large, open, empty area, which, if you think about it, if you have a spear of cells surrounding that empty space, that's what a follicle is. And in the pars intermedia, we have a lot of follicles. So you're going to notice these areas, basically empty areas. Okay, those are just called follicles. In addition to this, in the pars intermedia, most of the cells are going to be basophils. So in one that you can really see it, you're going to have kind of this darkened band where you know, going across, as opposed to the pars anterior, the anterior pituitary, where you have more of the pink cells, some of the chromophobes that lighten that up a little bit. Okay. So the pars intermedia, or just the intermediate pituitary, makes a hormone called melanin stimulating hormone. So very simple, and again, I apologize, I don't think this is in your lab manual. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I don't think it's in there. But basically, it's stimulating the melanocytes in your skin. And the melanocytes are the cells that make the pigmentation in your skin. So the pars intermedia is making this hormone that helps to control the pigmentation of your skin. Okay? Okay, this is just another look at the pars intermedia. This thin area, you can see there's a follicle here. The pars anterior and the pars, anterior pituitary, posterior pituitary are here. So this is not a great slide, but it's another look at the intermediate pituitary. Okay, so the posterior pituitary has a very different appearance to it. The posterior pituitary is made up of nervous tissue, hence the name pars nervosa. We're not going to ask you what particular cells are called in here. I just want you to be aware that this is nervous tissue, and really to talk about what's going on with the posterior pituitary, we also have to bring in the hypothalamus, because the hypothalamus is also closely associated with the posterior pituitary. And what's going on is the hypothalamus actually produces two hormones on its own. It makes a hormone called antidiuretic hormone. And antidiuretic hormone, everybody knows, drink a diuretic, it makes you go to the bathroom. So antidiuretic hormone, also known I think as vasopressin, that is going to increase water retention, so it'll increase your blood volume, increase your blood pressure. Okay, that's one. The other one is oxytocin. Okay, so oxytocin stimulates contractions during childbirth. Okay, those two hormones are made by the hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus can do one of two things. It can either directly release those into the bloodstream where they can go and do their job, okay, or the hypothalamus can send them down axons. There are nerve cells in the hypothalamus with long axons that extend down into the posterior pituitary. The hormones can travel along those axons down into the posterior pituitary, where they are stored until they're needed. Okay, so the posterior pituitary is not actually producing any hormones, but it does store those two hormones, antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. And then when they are needed, they can be released into the bloodstream. Okay, so this is what the posterior pituitary looks like. A few shots of that. Some more. You see there are axons in there. Okay, so that's our look at the pituitary gland. Again, I'm going to pause for a second. Are there any questions about the pituitary? Okay. We're going to switch gears then. We're going to look at the pineal gland. We're going to look very quickly at the pineal gland because we don't have any slides for that. We have a slide for the pituitary. When you look at that slide, you'll be looking to tell the different parts, anterior, posterior, and intermediate apart. That's what I expect from you, that slide. You should be able to associate the hormones of the pituitary. Of course, we want to talk about the two hormones that are produced and released in response to that thyroid stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary. So that thyroid stimulating hormone comes down, it acts on the thyroid, and it causes the thyroid to release two hormones. They are called T3 and T4. They have big long names. Actually, not that long, but we don't even know by that. There's T3 and T4. Okay? Both of those are iodine-based hormones. That's why you need to have iodine in your diet, that and nothing else that I know of. And they stimulate your basal metabolism. So if you're underproducing those hormones, your basal metabolism slows down. Okay, so that's why if somebody has hypothyroidism, hypo meaning under or lower, lesser, no, not lesser, lower, under, your thyroid is not working as well as it should. It's underproducing those hormones. So people with hypothyroidism tend to be have a little extra weight because their metabolism's damped down. Hyperthyroidism, on the other hand, your thyroid is overactive, and so those people may have a tendency to be thinner. That's not a universal thing. You can have people that have hyperthyroid that are overweight, for example, okay? But just kind of a way to think about it. All right, so those are the two hormones for the thyroid gland that are involved in metabolism. There's one other, and that other one is made by a different type of cell. So, and this is not anything you need to know, but the cells that surround the follicles are originally enough called follicular cells. We have this adrenal gland, the structure is something that we're going to see repeated. There's an outer covering on the adrenal glands called the capsule. This is a connective tissue covering. It helps to protect the adrenal gland, or if you have a capsule is protecting that gland or organ. It's also serving as an attachment point, helping to anchor that organ or gland into place in wherever it's located within the body. Below that, we have a cortex. The cortex is the outer portion of a particular gland or organ, and then we have an inner portion known as the medulla. In the case of the adrenal gland, we see that the adrenal gland, this cortex, wraps around the medulla, okay? And in fact, you might see on your slides when you look at the adrenal glands, you might see that it just looks like kind of a horseshoe, because it may look open on that. Some you might see that they've kind of gotten folded, look more like an L. But just be aware that this adrenal gland as such is almost, you can kind of just think of it as a mirror image. If I draw a line down the middle, what I see going this way is going to be the same as what goes this way. Okay, so if I tell you about this part, I'm really telling you about both of them. All right? All right, so here's a look at it. A little overwhelming, I know. Here's the capsule up here. This area through here, this is the cortex, the adrenal cortex. This is the adrenal medulla. Adrenal medulla is made up of a lot of these basophilic cells. They're called chromaffin cells, so it has that distinctive purple appearance. The appearance of the cortex changes depending on what area of it you're in, okay? There are 3 zones in the cortex, and I think your lab manual mentions them, I think. This upper zone here is known as the zona glomerulosa. This mid portion is called the zona fasciculata. And this lower portion is called the zona reticularis. And I shorten it, I just call them glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis. I know that's not shortening them too much, but we do what we can. And hopefully I can, as we go through these, hopefully I can help you see what the differences are between them. Okay, this is just another look. Here's the medulla, here's the cortex, here's the fasciculata is down here, so you have a little bit of comparison between the two. So, what we're seeing with the glomerulosa, we see the cells organized as clusters. Okay, they're sort of these circular or semicircular clusters of cells. The cells stain a little bit darker. Okay, if you look at the fasciculata is maybe a little bit more acidophilic. It's lighter staining, so the zona glomerulosa is a bit darker. It's a darker region. And the other thing I want you to notice is the cells in the glomerulosa are smaller than the cells in the fasciculata. Okay? And you can kind of get that sense because the nuclei are more tightly packed together in the glomerulosa than they are in the fasciculata. Okay? So, the glomerulosa makes a group of hormones that are called the pancreas. I don't think of the pancreas as a gland, so you might think of it more as an organ, and that's fine. The pancreas is interesting because it has both endocrine and exocrine function. The exocrine function is involved in digestion, and we'll revisit that in a few weeks. But for the endocrine function, we're interested in these areas of the pancreas that are called pancreatic islets. Okay, they're also called the islets of Langerhans. Here they are. When you look